A Navajo girl knocked at his door with a baby and said, "They're coming, please protect him." The wind had teeth that night, and it bit hard. Snow fell like hushings from heaven, soft but unrelenting, blanketing the world in white that wasn't clean so much as cold. The sky was a pale, breathless thing above the plain, and the world below didn't seem to move except for one slow column of smoke drifting from a chimney, dark against the dim. The cabin looked like it had been built by a man who meant to disappear, half swallowed by a crooked rise of pines and shadowed rock. No one came out this far by chance. Inside, the fire crackled low. A man moved with the kind of care that comes from both habit and hurt. Quiet, economical. He placed a fresh log into the hearth with fingers thick as fence posts, but precise as any old violinist's. His coat still clung to his shoulders. Snow melted off the brim of his hat. He hadn't taken them off yet. Maybe he didn't see the point. He stirred beans in a black pot and let them burn a little on the bottom, just enough to remind himself he was alive. His name wasn't known to many anymore. Time had done its work on his name like it had on his face, worn it down, smoothed it out, made it quiet. But once, years back, they called him Walker. No one remembered why. Maybe it was what he did, walked away from everything that ever meant something. He sat down with his plate and ate without ceremony, watching the fire more than the food. Behind him, the cabin breathed in wood creaks and wind moans. His old dog lay curled in the corner, ribcage lifting slow, one ear twitching at ghosts. He didn't expect the knock. It came soft, like it wasn't sure it had the right place. 3 gentle taps, barely louder than the snow hitting the roof. He waited, figured it was wind. The dog lifted its head, looked at the door, then him. The knock came again, a little firmer this time. He stood. Boots scuffed the worn wood as he crossed to the door, hand brushing the shotgun propped just inside. Not grabbing it, just checking it was still there. The third knock came just as he reached for the handle. When he opened the door, the cold punched through like a breath that meant to kill. And there she stood. A girl, barely more than that. 17, maybe 18, though her face looked carved by years that didn't belong to someone so young. Her hair hung in black strands from a braid gone loose, crusted with frost. Snow clung to the hem of her skirt and to the wool around her shoulders. Her eyes didn't move like someone asking for help. They moved like someone asking for mercy. In her arms, a bundle. She didn't wait to be asked. Her voice was low and hoarse from either the wind or something worse. "They're coming." She looked down at the bundle and back up at him. "Please protect him." She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She said it like a thing decided, like a last will whispered in the dark. And then she turned. Walker's hand shot out before he knew what he was doing, catching her wrist. But she slipped from his grasp like mist and vanished into the storm, swallowed by snow and dusk and whatever she was running from. He stood there in the doorway too long. The baby in. The bundle had started crying, a thin, worn sound, like lungs that hadn't learned how to be alive yet. The dog whined behind him. The cold clawed at his ankles. Still he didn't move. He looked out at the white, at the way it erased everything. And then he shut the door. He'd forgotten what a baby sounded like. At first he thought it might cry itself to sleep, but it didn't. Just kept sobbing in little fits, then gasping for breath like it expected someone to answer. Walker lit a lamp and unwrapped the cloths. Flannel worn and patched, but tucked tight with care. The child was small, smaller than seemed right. Its face was flushed red from the cold, and its fists punched at the air like it meant to fight. The world. He found old cloths in a trunk, boiled water, soaked a strip, tried feeding it. Goat's milk was all he had, and not much. The baby sucked greedily. It stopped crying. Just like that. He almost laughed. Almost. He made a bed in the bottom drawer of a dresser, lined with wool and his best shirt. The baby slept there, snug as something holy. Walker didn't sleep that night, sat by the window, the shotgun across his lap, watching the trees, listening for hoofbeats. The dog never lay down, just paced and whimpered and growled at things no one could see. By dawn, the wind had calmed, but the world felt sharper. He stepped outside. The snow crunched in that dead, silent way it only does when it's new and deep. He looked for tracks. Hers were there at first, stumbling, dragging, but maybe 100 paces from the cabin, they vanished into nothing. No sign of struggle, no blood, no direction, just gone. He came back inside and shut the door. The days that followed passed like smoke. He fed the child, changed it, held it when it cried, which wasn't often. It watched him with wide, curious eyes like it knew something he didn't. He called it boy in his head, though he hadn't checked, just felt like the right word. He'd forgotten how small people started. He tried not to think of her. But every time he stepped outside, he looked for signs. A torn scarf, a dropped track, a bird flushed from silence. Nothing. The land had swallowed her whole. She'd known what she was doing. He found himself talking to the baby. Not real. Words, just murmurs. Sound for the sake of sound. Sometimes he'd say, "I'm not your father." Sometimes he'd whisper, "It's okay now." And once, when the fire cracked just right and the boy curled against his chest like something that belonged there, he said, "You're safe." He didn't know if it was true. That fifth night, something changed. The dog growled low, pacing again. Walker stood slow and quiet, peering out the window. Boot prints, not hers. They circled the barn, came from the ridge. He didn't see horses, but he knew the pattern. He'd tracked men once, years back, knew what it looked like when someone meant to sneak and not spook. He stayed awake till morning. At dawn, he went out and scattered ashes over the prints, dragged a branch to hide the trail, checked the traps, loaded every round he had into his belt and counted them twice. Whoever they were, they'd come again. On the seventh day, the snow gave way to cold rain, and in the grey, dripping light of morning, he found her again. She was face down near the goat pen, one arm curled under her like a child sleeping. Her hair was soaked, and blood painted one side of her skirt in rust. He thought she was dead. He really did. Then she coughed. He carried her inside. She was lighter than she should have been, bones wrapped in storm and resolve. He laid her by the fire, stripped her coat, and wrapped her in dry blankets. She didn't speak, didn't open her eyes, but her hand twitched toward the child's. Draw when he brought her in. Just a flicker. Enough. She slept through that day and the next. On the third, she sat up and drank water, then slept again. No questions, no thanks. But when the baby cried, she was the one who picked him up first. The cabin felt different after that, not warm exactly, but fuller. The kind of full that comes with people who don't speak, but share the same silence. He watched her from the corner of his eye as he worked. She moved like a deer, wary, sudden, but there was strength in her slowness. Not fear, not anymore, just waiting, like someone watching for a reason to stay. That night she sat by the fire long after the baby had fallen asleep between them. The lamplight flickered. Her face was still. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "They're still coming," he nodded once. She nodded back. That was all. But something between them shifted, like ice cracking underfoot, not to break but to make room. Out in the woods the crows were louder, and somewhere beyond the ridge a fire flickered behind trees. But inside the cabin the child slept, and the girl stayed. And the man sat still, breathing smoke, watching flame, and not running anymore. By morning the girl was gone again. Not in body. She still lay curled beneath the blanket near the fire. But in spirit. Her eyes were open but turned inward, seeing things far from here. She drank the broth he left by her side without looking at him, held the baby close like something half-remembered. And when the wind shifted and the chimney gave a long, low moan, She flinched like it was someone's voice. He didn't ask questions. He didn't speak at all. Instead, he split more wood than he needed, stacked it along the back wall of the cabin like he expected winter to last longer than usual. Each swing of the axe was steady, clean, and final. His coat flapped in the wind like it was trying to fly away from him. The dog stayed close, pacing slow circles, eyes locked on the tree line. That morning, the child cried louder than before. Walker listened, kept his hands busy, but didn't move toward the sound. He waited, and the girl rose. Her steps were unsteady, her body still hollowed by cold and distance. But she went to the drawer, lifted the child like she'd never been. "Gone!" and hushed him with a sound that broke something open in the silence. He watched her from the corner of his eye. She didn't look his way, but when she pressed her lips to the baby's hair and whispered something in a tongue he didn't know, he felt it like heat under old scars. Later, she sat outside with the child tucked in the bend of her arm. He brought her a mug of goat's milk, warm, with a pinch of honey. She took it with a nod, no words, but she drank every drop. When he returned to chopping wood, she watched him with eyes that weren't curious, but careful, like she'd known men who split things for the wrong reasons. By midday, the snow had turned to ice-glazed mud, and he found the prints again. Older, now harder to read, but still there, scuff marks behind the barn, drag lines near the fence. Someone had been testing distance, watching. He didn't tell her, but he added a second latch to the back door. Reset the tripwire by the goat pen, sharpened the hatchet. She noticed. Her hands tightened on the baby when he came back in, stained with sap and steel. Her eyes flicked to the windows, to the shadows stretching longer with each passing day. That night they shared stew from the same pot. The baby slept between them on a folded quilt. The fire was low, the cabin quiet. He stirred the stew absently. She ran her fingers through the baby's dark hair. When the dog growled once, low and deep, she looked to the door, then to him. He said nothing, but she understood. She moved slower after that, sat with her back to the wall, listened for things that didn't make sound. He watched her build a wall of silence around herself that looked too much like the one he'd built years ago. On the fourth day, she spoke again. I left at night. Her voice came like wind through pine, soft, steady, full of things unsaid. He wasn't supposed to come with me. She looked at the baby then. Didn't cry, didn't blink, just ran a thumb across his cheek like she was counting the seconds. But he did. Walker nodded slow. His hands were wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. The baby stirred in his sleep. She quieted him without thought. That was all she said. That was all he needed. The next morning she helped him bring water from the stream. Her steps were stronger now, her eyes less hollow. She carried the bucket with both hands, water sloshing at her thighs, chin lifted. To the wind, like she remembered how to breathe. He handed her a clean cloth to dry her fingers. She held it for a moment, then folded it with care and set it back on the shelf. No words, just the shared language of people trying. As they worked, the world outside changed subtly but surely. Crows came closer to the cabin. The dog barked more often and slept less. Once, Walker saw a flicker of movement along the ridge, but when he blinked, it was gone. He didn't chase it. Some things reveal themselves better when you wait. He carved notches into the cabin doorframe, one for each day since she arrived. When she noticed, she said nothing, but later he found a second notch beneath his, carved smaller, shallower, her way of marking time. That night, while the baby slept, she touched the old guitar hanging on the wall, ran her fingers along the broken strings like she knew the song it used to play. Her hands trembled. He almost told her to take it down, almost offered to fix it. Instead, he stood and said, "Used to be music here." She turned to him, and for the first time she smiled, a quiet, tired, barely there thing. But it stayed. He sat down again, poked the fire. The light moved across their faces in amber and gold. After a while, she asked what was her name. He didn't answer, didn't move. The fire snapped once. The baby breathed in a soft, snoring rhythm. He stared at the flames like they could speak for him. She waited a long time, then nodded, not in frustration but in understanding, and said nothing else. The storm came that night. Not wind or snow, but memory. He dreamed of a small grave under an oak tree, of blood in creek water, of a woman's last breath caught between his hands like smoke. He woke, sweating, eyes wide, the shotgun already in his grip. The cabin was still, the baby asleep. The girl watching him from across the room, her face pale in the firelight. She said, "I know that look," and went back to sleep. The next day, she stitched the torn hem of his coat, sat on the porch, needle moving like breath, the baby at her feet, chewing on a bit of leather. He didn't ask her to. She didn't ask to be thanked. It was the kind of thing someone does when they've decided to stay a little longer. He watched her for a long time before going back to chopping wood. That evening, she placed the coat on the hook by the door. He touched the seam without looking at her, then said, "You so good." She shrugged, but her shoulders softened. And when? The baby cried later that night and she didn't wake. He picked the child up without hesitation, rocked him slow, whispered a lullaby he barely remembered. The baby gripped his finger in sleep. He didn't let go. By the 7th day, they had a rhythm. He brought water, she ground cornmeal. He chopped, she mended. He guarded the door, she watched the child. They rarely spoke. But the house felt fuller, alive in a way that didn't need words. The dog started wagging his tail again. On the 8th day, while fixing a shutter, he found the bullet hole. Small, clean, in the outer wall, just above the window where the cradle sat. He didn't say anything, just sanded the wood smooth, patched it, painted over it with ash and oil. But that night, he moved the cradle closer to the fire. The girl noticed, said nothing, but when she fed the baby later, she leaned into his shoulder just for a moment. The fire crackled, the room breathed. In the morning, the dog growled again, sharp this time, then ran toward the trees, barking. Walker followed, found nothing but bent grass and a rope snare freshly cut. He returned slower than he'd gone out. At the cabin, the girl was waiting, baby in arms, eyes wide but steady. She didn't ask. He didn't lie. "They're close," he said, voice flat. She nodded, tightened her grip on the child. That evening, she placed her old knife on the table between them. Its edge was chipped, the handle worn smooth. He took it, sharpened it, handed it back. She tucked it in her belt without a word. The fire burned low that night, but no one moved to feed it. They just sat, listening, waiting, each of them carrying old wounds like lanterns, each of them guarding something worth saving. And outside, the trees whispered secrets to the dark. The name came quiet, like everything else about her, Ash. She said it without ceremony one morning as she ground corn against stone, the baby dozing against her back. He hadn't asked, wouldn't have, but she offered it just the same. Voice, low, as if testing how it sounded in the open air. "Ash is what's left when fire's done with you." She didn't look at him when she said it. Just kept grinding, fingers steady, gaze fixed far past the cabin walls. He nodded once, didn't say it back. But the name settled into the space between them, like it had always been there. She moved with more certainty now, still cautious, still watching for threats in shadows and silence, but the weight in her steps had shifted. She walked like someone, staying, not fleeing, like someone learning to breathe again. The baby had grown louder, not in distress, just in life. He cooed when she passed near, reached for the dog's ears, gurgled when he saw the light in Walker's eyes. They'd started calling him boy out loud now, both of them, not because it was his name, but because it was enough for now. Walker watched the way Ash mothered, not with softness exactly, but with a fierceness that quieted everything around it. She held the child like he was her spine, tucked him close even when her arms were sore, and sometimes, when she thought no one watched, she hummed something low and full of longing, words in a tongue the land remembered even if he didn't. She didn't speak much of where she came from, didn't speak much at all, but Walker could read the stories on her hands, old scars, calluses shaped by knives and ropes, and the way her fingers twitched in her sleep like they were counting things no one else could see. He never asked about her family. She never asked about his. They shared labor instead, chopping, fixing, cooking, the kind of work that stitched people together without needing words. She'd taken to mending things around the cabin, reins, old curtains, frayed edges of solitude. Sometimes she left small carvings on the wooden beams, symbols he didn't recognize, protective maybe, or just reminders. He let her. She took her meals sitting by the door now, where she could see the trees, never turned her back to the forest. The wind brought more than cold. Sometimes it carried memory, and when it did, she'd go quiet, eyes tracking a path only she could see. The baby would stir and settle again, as if used to it. One night, as frost whispered against the window, she set her knife on the table between them again. Not for sharpening this time, just resting there, like a question. She had a brother. When she said, staring into the flame, "He carved animals like you," her eyes didn't blink, didn't shine. They took him first. The words didn't fall heavy. They drifted barely there, as though she'd said them before, maybe to the trees, maybe to no one. She didn't say who they were, didn't need to. The silence between them was wide, but familiar now, a thing they both knew how to live in. Walker didn't speak, just reached into the shelf above the hearth and took down a small wooden figure. A rabbit, carved rough, but with care. He set it beside her knife. She looked at it a long time, then placed it gently in the baby's hands. After that, she slept easier. Each day after, she carved one of her own, simple shapes, a bear, a bird, a tiny wolf, left them on the sill or in the child's bed. One morning, Walker found a feather carved into the handle of his mug. He ran a thumb over it and didn't say a word. Spring didn't come quickly. The snow had stopped, but the ground stayed hard. Trees groaned in the wind. The cabin felt smaller and fuller at once, like a heart learning how to beat again. Ash began training with the rifle. She asked without asking, stood near it one afternoon, eyes steady, hands quiet. Walker watched her, then handed it over without speech. She took it with both hands, cradled it like it was alive. She wasn't a stranger to weapons. Her grip was wrong at first, too tight, too wary, but she corrected quickly. Took aim at the tree line, shoulders squared, lips tight. He showed her how to breathe before the shot. She fired once, missed, fired again, hit the stump dead center. Didn't flinch, he said. Not my first time, she replied. They didn't speak of why she'd need it, but they both knew the answer. The baby crawled for the first time 2 days later, dragging himself across the floor toward the rabbit figure. Ash cried, not loudly, not with sobs, but with a kind of quiet awe. She knelt beside him, kissed his forehead, then turned away, so Walker wouldn't see her eyes. He didn't mention it. She began keeping her pack by the door again, but not as if she was planning to leave. It was more like she wanted to be ready, in case the world came knocking again, in case the peace they'd gathered broke apart like thin ice underfoot. Walker built a second cradle, one sturdy enough to last through more than just a passing. When he finished, he set it beside the hearth and said nothing. But Ash moved the baby there that night, and in the morning she folded his best shirt and laid it over the edge like a blanket. Trust wasn't spoken between them. It showed up in small acts, a clean shirt, a split log, a shared cup of silence. And sometimes in the way their hands brushed at the door without either pulling away. One evening, as clouds thickened like bruises overhead, she asked him if he'd ever been in love. He didn't answer, but after a long silence, he said once. Ash didn't press. She just nodded slow and placed the child on his lap. The boy curled into him like he belonged there. Walker's arms held fast without thought. Ash turned away, tending the fire, but her eyes were soft in the glow. That night the dog didn't sleep, paced from wall to window, ears up, tail low, growled at nothing, barked at the trees. Walker stood beside him, gun in hand, breath tight. Ash moved without needing to be told, pulled the child close, checked the back latch, retrieved her knife. No sound came, no movement, but they all knew something had changed. In the early dark before dawn, Walker stepped out onto the porch. Snow was gone, but the wind carried a new scent. Not storm, but smoke. Not fire, but flesh. He came back, inside, and shut the door slow. Ash was sitting at the table, knife across her lap. "You saw them," she said. He nodded. 6 riders, maybe more. Hill line, watching. They're here for him, not just him. She looked at him for a long moment. Not searching, knowing. "We don't run. We don't." She didn't smile, but her shoulders straightened, and she stood taller than she had in weeks. She looked like someone who'd carried death and didn't plan on letting it win this time. Walker loaded the rifle. Ash tied her braid tighter. The baby slept in the cradle, one fist wrapped around the wooden rabbit. Outside, a hawk cried once and was gone. Inside, the fire burned quiet and steady. Tomorrow would be different, and whatever came, they would face it together. Ash stood, with her back to the rising sun, baby on her hip, staring toward the ridge. The light behind her painted the frost gold, but her face stayed still, unreadable. She'd been watching the same place every morning now, as if expecting something to show itself, as if it already had. Walker didn't need to ask. The trees beyond the fence had grown quiet, too quiet. Birds didn't roost near the cabin anymore. The wind shifted strange, like it carried someone else's breath, and when the dog sniffed the air now, his hackles lifted slow, deliberate. Trouble was near, not loud yet, but close enough to smell. Ash came inside and laid the baby down in the drawer. He barely stirred any more when placed there, used to the shape of safety. She ran a hand over his back, slow and steady, then turned to the fire. Walker handed her coffee, black and hot. She took it with a nod, her fingers trembling only slightly. They didn't speak for a long while. Then she said, "He's not mine." Her voice didn't waver. It wasn't confession, only truth, dropped into the room like a stone in still water. Walker didn't react, not outwardly, just looked at her with the same evenness he always wore. But something inside him clicked into place. Ash sat by the fire, her eyes distant. She didn't look at him when she spoke again. "My sister, she died birthing him." It was winter, no midwife, no warning, just blood and cold and a crying baby. She sipped her coffee, let the silence breathe around her. Her man, he was gone by then, owed men, wrong men. Said he'd fix it, pay it back. Never did. When they came looking, they came for what he left. She looked at the child, sleeping small and warm in his drawer. They didn't care whose blood ran in him, just that he had blood. Walker didn't move, but the muscles in his jaw clenched slow. "I ran," Ash said, "with nothing but his name and my knife. They followed, still are." She finally looked at him, her eyes flat and bright all at once. "I didn't lie when I asked you to protect him. I just didn't know if you'd say yes if you knew." "It wasn't mine to ask." Walker stared into the fire. His voice came low. "Don't matter whose he is. He's here now." Ash nodded once, just once, and the moment passed between them, like something old being reborn. Later that day, Walker pulled the rifle down from above the hearth. Not just to clean it. He oiled it with care, checked the sights, replaced the old sling. Then he pulled out the second rifle, The one with the stock carved by hand, initials burned into the side. It hadn't been fired since before he left the law. Ash sat across the table, sharpening her knife. "We readying for a war?" "Not war," he said, "just a reckoning." She smiled, a small thing, no joy in it, just understanding. They began fortifying the place slowly, not loud, not panicked, just work, steady and quiet. Walker added a crossbeam to the front door, dug shallow pits around the back of the cabin, and laid glass inside, covered by snow. He showed Ash how to check the traps, how to set the line with a bell if it tripped. She learned fast. He taught her to shoot. The rifle looked too big in her hands at first, but her eyes never blinked when she sighted. She had the hands of someone who knew pain and chose resolve. On her fourth shot, she hit the edge of a distant fence post. On the fifth, she hit the center. She didn't smile, just nodded. Walker handed her a box of rounds. Later, while the baby slept, she stood at the window, wrapped in the old shawl, and said, "I was going to keep running, I still might." Walker didn't reply, just added more wood to the fire, but she didn't leave. She made stew that night and hummed a lullaby under her breath, and when the child stirred, she pressed her cheek against his soft hair, eyes closed like prayer. At dawn, smoke curled above the hill, thin like someone didn't mean to be seen, but careless enough to be noticed. Walker saw it first. He stood on the porch, eyes narrow, arms folded. Ash came to stand beside him. "4, maybe 5, he said. She didn't answer, just stared with that same stillness that didn't belong to her youth. Then she asked if they come. "What'll you do?" He didn't speak for a while. The breeze tugged at his collar. The dog sat beside them, silent. "Whatever I have to." She looked at him then, really looked. Not like a stranger, not like a guest, but like someone who saw him whole, the hurt, the quiet, the line of a man still bleeding beneath his skin. She placed her hand over his, briefly, then let go. The baby cried once inside. She went to him. Walker remained outside, watching the hills, the smoke, the long shape of danger coming down through the pines. That night, he carved a second toy, a bird this time, wings outspread. Set it beside the cradle without a word. Ash noticed, picked it up, ran her thumb over the grain like it might fly in her hands. She placed it back and whispered, "Thank you." The wind picked up. The dog didn't sleep. And outside, something watched from beyond the tree line. Walker didn't chase it. He just sat, by the fire, boots muddy, rifle near, and waited. Ash sat beside him, her knife in her lap, her back against the wall. Neither of them spoke, but between them a quiet had formed that no fear could touch, and above the ridge the smoke thickened. Ash woke before the baby. The world was blue in the window, not daylight, not night, that in-between hush where even the trees held their breath. She moved quietly, stepping barefoot over the creaking floorboards, her shawl drawn close around her. She looked to the cradle first. The child slept curled like a comma, one hand flung across his chest. His breathing was soft, still safe. Walker was already outside. She found him in the half-light, leaning against the post near the porch, rifle in hand, eyes on the hills. His face was unreadable, carved out of that old silence he wore so easily. Behind him, the dog stood alert, tail stiff, ears turned toward the pines like they heard something the wind hadn't told her yet. "They're close," he said without turning. Ash nodded. She didn't ask how he knew. Some things weren't heard. They were felt, like the shift in a horse's weight just before it bolts, or the way the air goes still before lightning touches it. She stepped down beside him. Her boots left small, neat prints in the frost. The rifle she'd trained with now hung from her shoulder. She had tied her braid tight and wrapped her wrist with leather. No words on her lips, just readiness. "How many?" she asked. "5, maybe 6. He paused, then added, "One with a scar across his throat. I know that face." "From before?" Walker didn't answer right away. His jaw clenched, his eyes never left the tree line. From when I used to follow men like him, now they follow me. Ash didn't press. The history between his words was sharp enough to bleed on. She simply nodded again, like she understood. And maybe she did. They spent the morning, preparing, not rushed but deliberate. Every movement felt final. Walker laid out weapons on the table like relics of another life. 2 rifles, a revolver, a sawed-off double barrel with nicks along the grip. He cleaned each one slowly, with a kind of reverence. Ash checked the traps out back, reset them where she knew footsteps might fall. She carried the child strapped to her chest, humming softly, a song with no name. By midday, the wind shifted. The smoke was gone now, but the silence had thickened. Even the birds had left. Walker stood at the edge of the clearing and stared toward the hills. When he returned, he said simply, "They're here." Ash didn't tremble. Instead, she took the baby to the root cellar and laid him inside the cradle Walker had built from scrap and memory. She covered him with thick blankets, set water nearby, and kissed his forehead once. "Stay quiet, little fire," she whispered. She came out and bolted. The trapdoor behind her. Her knife was already in her boot. Her fingers didn't shake. The first man came through the trees like he didn't expect resistance. Tall, heavy-set, one of those men whose cruelty grew like lichen, slow but rooted deep. He stepped over the tripwire and kept walking. Walker didn't wait. The shot rang out like thunder against the quiet. The man dropped before he knew he'd been seen. Ash was already in place at the rear window. She saw movement, 2 more cutting low through the brush, rifles raised, trying to flank. She raised her rifle, held her breath. Remembered Walker's. Hands correcting hers, steadying her aim. She fired once, missed, they scattered. She ducked low, waited. One reappeared to her left, crawling close. Her second shot hit him in the shoulder. He screamed, loud, sharp, a sound that cracked the stillness like a tree snapping in a storm. Walker stepped outside, revolver in hand, and fired twice more. 1 shot clean to the chest. The man fell forward, face in the snow. Then the leader came. Scar along his neck, hat low, coat long. He moved like a man who thought himself untouchable. He didn't run. He walked straight through the clearing toward the cabin, stepping over bodies like they were fallen logs. And when he reached the porch, he called out, "Ain't no law gonna save you. Ain't no fence strong enough." Walker stood in the doorway, gun steady. Didn't ask the law. The man smiled, slow and crooked. "Then I'll bury you with your silence." Before he could raise his weapon, the dog lunged. Walker had never trained him to fight, but that didn't matter. Rage and loyalty are kin when the fire starts. The dog tore into the man's arm just as he fired. The shot went wide, cracked the porch beam. Ash screamed. Walker didn't hesitate. He fired once, through the man's throat. The scar split, wider as he fell backward, mouth opening in a wet, choked gurgle. The dog whimpered, bleeding from the flank but alive. Ash was beside them a moment later, rifle raised, eyes wild. "Another behind the barn," she said, moving fast. Walker nodded. "Go." She ran. She found the last man crouched near the goat pen, trying to reload. He looked up just in time to see her face, not angry, not afraid, just done. She raised her rifle. He laughed. "You won't—" She pulled the trigger. The sound echoed, and then there was only wind again. Ash stood there a moment, breathing hard, until the wind softened and the trees stopped watching. Then she turned and walked back. Walker was kneeling by the dog, whispering things no one else would hear. Blood soaked his sleeve, but it wasn't his. Ash crouched beside him, pressed her hand to his back. The dog licked her wrist. "You did good," she whispered. They buried the bodies deep beyond the ridge. No prayers, just stones over the dirt and silence between shovels. The scarred man's gun they threw in the creek. That night, Ash lit a fire with her own hands. Walker sat nearby, sharpening a blade out of habit more than need. The baby cried. once from below, and they both moved, then paused, smiled. "He's all right," Walker said. "Knows the world's different now." Ash leaned her head against the wall. "So do I." Walker looked at her. Really looked. Her eyes were tired but not hollow. Her hands rough but steady. "You stayin'?" he asked. She didn't answer right away, just closed her eyes and whispered, "I think I've stopped running." Spring came slow. The snow melted from the eaves. The creek swelled. Wildflowers crept up along the fence line, stubborn and lovely. Ash planted herbs in small pots on the sill. The baby, not so much a baby anymore, crawled through the grass, chasing shadows and beetles. Walker carved a third toy, a bear, and watched the boy wrap his fist around it like it was treasure. The porch swing creaked again. Ash sat there sometimes, watching the hills, rifle resting against the wall, child in her lap. Walker would bring her coffee and say nothing. The silence between them was no longer sharp. It was soft now, like breath shared under a blanket, and the door stayed open.